Welcome, Maria Sirois. It's wonderful to see you again.
Oh, such a joy to be with you, Mark.
Thanks. I'd like to start just by asking you how you were first drawn to resilience as a focus of your work as a positive psychologist.
So, in my doctoral program, I had been given the opportunity to work at a cancer hospital in Boston, Dana-Farber, in the pediatric unit. And I was assigned to the bone marrow ward, which is often the place of last resort for children. And so, a number of the children I cared for that year were not able to overcome cancer and died. And I wasn't surprised to see families fall apart in that context, of course. What I was surprised by were the families who actually became stronger in the presence of the impending loss of a son or a daughter. And that fascinated me. They became kinder, they became more clear about what was important to them. They were doubling down on what worked for them, all sorts of strategies that I now understand as resilient strategies that seemed both brilliant and mysterious to me at the time. And so it was witnessing adults and siblings in the presence of death actually grow over time that inspired my focus of attention on resilience.
Let's go back a little earlier. I think you had some experience as a kid and in your family around death, loss, grieving. And how did that set you up to be so receptive to that new information?
I think that one of the most profound losses I experienced at 19, a cousin of mine died of brain tumor after a 6 month journey with cancer. So he was 27, vital, alive. The world was his oyster. He had his leather jacket, the motorcycle, bunches of friends, and then 6 months later, he was gone. And that shocked me. Um, that shocked me. And it was that sudden, abrupt shift in how the world did and didn't make sense that I think set me up to be vulnerable for the exploration of how do we do this?
Mm.
How do we keep showing up to life when at any moment everything can be, it's like King Kong stepping on the town, like everything can be decimated, but life is still going on. But my heart is broken, but I want to go back to school, but all of that.
Yeah. So let's talk about what's going on in the world today. A lot of folks are dealing with profound despair, a sense of hopelessness, powerlessness, in need of healing. So, on a personal level, when someone comes to you as a therapist who can't find their footing, they can't find any hope, they can't find any reason for moving forward. Let's talk about the practices, the steps that you take with that person to to begin to build that sense of possibility.
Yeah, I mean, the first step always is, validation and compassion for their experience, how they see themselves in the world and how the world appears to them. And there is no forward motion. There is no positive psychology path until the client or the consultant feels that they have been seen and heard and validated. Um, and that's not hard to do. It's not hard to validate people's despair right now, um, because I think we're all experiencing some disillusionment to a certain degree and disenchantment, if not outright depression and despair. There's a beautiful understanding in the field of resilience that our capacity to actually tolerate paradox is what is healing. And so we can build a bridge between experiences of very difficult thoughts, very difficult emotions, and the possibility of slightly better or of a slightly better future by helping the client live into what I, in my field, call the genius of the and. I notice that you continue to be depressed and feel like there's nothing out there, and yet you keep showing up here, and yet you come, and yet you honor and respect your desire to feel better. And so to actually gently navigate holding the balance of that which is horrible and difficult and negating of our life force and that which is life-giving, I think is one of the tasks that we set out to create together in the room.
Mm. We're not prepared to tolerate paradox and contradiction. Can you say a little more about how we can open our minds to dialectical thinking and the both and perspective when we feel so kind of tunneled into our grief or our darkness?
Yeah. Well, I think many of us have not been given the chance to experience their own thinking or their own experiencing in that way. So first we want to model it. And I talk about modeling it out loud. So I'll use the and relative to my experience, or I'll use the and relative to people we might know in common or experiences we might have read about in common, just to begin to set the framework for the possibility that human beings are capable of holding multiple experiences at the exact same time. Sometimes it's evident in, a client will mention a novel they're reading or a film, and it'll be evident in there. We can use the characters to illuminate this capacity to hate life and love someone at the same time, right? So it's
Mm,
really about demonstrating how it's already evident, perhaps within
mm,
them or around them, and then gently begin to layer in a practice, if you will, of beginning to participate in the world that way.
mm. And that doesn't mean pushing despair and grief away, right? So the grieving process goes on and on. The heart
Right.
breaks and lives by breaking,
Yes,
that's just
exactly.
part of being alive. And so we learn to experience grief without losing hope.
That is the goal, at least, or one goal. And there is a natural buoyancy also that is present in human beings that they themselves are surprised by. So I'm thinking now of a mom who lost a child who had two other children to continue to raise, who, her felt experience of the most of the day was incredibly filled with pain and burden and confusion and anger, and yet her two little ones can make her laugh,
Mhm.
and she didn't want to suppress the fact that she laughed. She felt a little bad about laughing because she felt guilty that she was somehow betraying the loss of her oldest child. And yet laughter emerged. So it's sort of it's, it's the same in the process of writing, is allowing the mystery of the moment to speak for itself, and then being able to step back and say, I wonder what that's telling us.
Mm,
It's a lot of wondering in therapy. I wonder, or might we wonder?
mm. Say a little more about this buoyancy you're talking about. I think that is so critical and key, and it is a mystery. It arises of its own accord. How can we make the conditions, make space for that buoyancy to happen?
Yeah. I'm a very concrete person, so I sometimes experiment with, naming that out loud and saying, I wonder if what your week would be like if you gave yourself 5% more permission to smile. Just that, and see what
Mm,
happens, right? So
mm,
we can practically encourage it and see what
yeah,
happens.
yeah.
Um, Again, we can just allow for the witnessing. I'd love for you to just notice how often you're touched by kindness this week, or how often you feel your heart opening as opposed to contracting, or just notice, like tick it off, how many. Um, so it's the both being witnessing and willing to experiment.
Mhm. Witnessing and being willing to experiment. So it's a give and take. There's surrender, there's action and surrender
Yes.
involved.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to just ask you about that. You say that hope is an emotion made manifest through action,
Yeah.
but I'm interested in knowing about surrender. What's the role of surrender in the resilience model, the resilience question?
Yeah. It's not a term I use often, but it is absolutely the dynamic that has to happen. So growth, resilience, adaptability can't happen unless we face reality as it is. If I'm in denial that I'm in pain, there's no growth. If I'm in denial that I'm causing myself more harm by certain habits of action, then there's no growth. If I'm pretending that I'm happy when the world is falling apart around me, there's no positive transformation possible. So the first paradoxical step is to be able to face the darkness exactly as it is and say, this is what George Bonanno from Columbia University in his research suggests that the number one first question that a resilient person will ask is, what is going on here? Like that thing happened.
Mm.
And how has that affected me? What did it do? Why am I, I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm angry all the time. I'm like, what is this? It's that facing reality.
Right, right. And so how do we determine when we're in a crisis moment, in a moment of uncertainty, when do we take action and when do we let things be? What are the criteria that we can consider when we're feeling into that riddle?
Yeah. I think we want to take action when it doesn't feel like we can shepherd hope or positive motion on our own, right? When the sort of natural flow of despair and hope isn't happening. We just keep cycling down, 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 down. We absolutely want to take action then. But the other way that we want to take action, or the other trigger for taking action, is when we recognize that the way we made meaning of life no longer holds for us.
Mm,
And that that we have to somehow find a way to recohere our place in the world now that, in my case, now that my brother died, or now that my cousin died, or now that I lost my job, or now that the pandemic, ruined everything for so many people I love. So that feeling of lostness. So it may not be darkness and despair that we're wrestling with or profound anxiety. We may just feel unmoored.
mhm,
And that's
mhm.
also a trigger to take action.
Isn't part of resilience acknowledging our lack of control?
That's
So it feels like to me the taking action as a response to feeling like we're cycling down can sometimes be an avoidance of the fact that we are not in control, that in fact there are conditions we really can't change. So how do you approach that question of controllessness,
yeah,
powerlessness for people
yeah.
with people?
99% of what we experience is out of our control
Right.
or was, shoved in our faces or handed to us. The one place we do have control over, right? And this is the Viktor Frankl perspective, is how we respond. And that is the control that I like to elevate or activate within any one of us. A reminder that this is horrible. No one would want this. You have been, life has just shot you 1,000 arrows. It would be excruciating for anyone. And how might you like to respond?
Mhm.
Right? How might you like to respond? And that centering oneself in who one is and how one opens up the doorway to choice. And resilience is a choice. It
Mhm.
is absolutely a choice. And it isn't always a choice. And the mistake people make is that resilience is a choice. I want to feel stronger all the time. I want to feel happier all the time. I want to feel clear and certain and confident all the time. Resilience is really adaptability. So it's a choice to, am I going to ram into the wave or am I going to let it take me and then ride the other side of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's such an important point around adaptability. And I wanted to ask you about nature and what we can learn from nature, observing nature, being in nature, about resilience. Emerson said that nature's our greatest teacher when it
Yeah,
comes to how do we live.
right.
So, what are some of the lessons people can take from nature when it comes to confronting difficulties?
Oh, so all sorts of beautiful teachings and metaphors. The classic of the plant growing in between the cracked sidewalks of the city street. There is a species of tree in Australia, in regions of Australia where there are frequent fires, and over centuries, the tree has learned to live predominantly underground. So in its bloom season, what you see are just the evidence of leaves on the ground, like because the tree is essentially underground and brilliant, right? I wrote a little bit last year about a moment sitting outside in my backyard, and we have a lot of white-tailed deer by us, and a deer had come into the border of my backyard, was nibbling on some of the bushes there, and two school children were crossing the yard next to us to go to school, making a lot of noise, and the deer froze, and the boys walked and then started to walk away, and then she just started nibbling again. I
Mhm,
was like, oh, she doesn't need to flee. We could just be still,
mhm.
wait for danger to pass, and continue on, you know. So the evidences of sort of adaptability are everywhere.
Yeah. And what about our own inner nature? I'm interested in the power of our inner nature and how nature moves through us in times of difficulty. And that connects to the buoyancy, the sense of there being an energy in us, a mysterious a lifting energy, the thing with feathers, as Emily Dickinson called it. And how do you point people to their own, getting into balance with their own inner nature through to help navigate difficult times?
Yeah. You know, a couple of different approaches. I love the approach of meditation and mindfulness as a way to learn to quiet the mind so that one can hear other
Mm,
voices, intuitive voices, can experience the feeling states of the body. You know, Carl Jung had a beautiful sort of dream approach. Let's talk about your dreams and what they are offering you and what they're teaching you about your inner repertoire, you know,
mm,
the treasure chest of understandings within you. There's certainly you know, sometimes we'll encourage people to bring in their whatever they're journaling or writing or drawing or crocheting, any, you know, any sort of creative motion. Like,
mm,
let's look at that together and see what that's
mm,
teaching us. I
mm,
was struck by a woman I knew, a grandmother who had lost both a child and a grandchild in a car accident, and she continued to knit. And you know, we all someone says I knit. You have an assumption, right? Like I assumed she was knitting blankets. Like I just
right.
that's where I went. And I asked her, bring in your knitting. She was actually knitting these beautiful, intricate sweaters for small dogs and cats, like with little puffballs on them. And I'm totally different than the image of the older person knitting a blanket, you know.
Yeah.
And so it got to see something about that, her creative force that was still evident, even
Mm,
though, as she said, she spends 80% of the day sobbing.
mm, mm. And that's the and. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
speaking of creativity, I'm interested in the connection between imagination and resilience.
Hmm.
That in moments when our backs are against the wall, we need to be able to imagine alternate possibilities. So how do we play with imagination, incorporate imagination without falling into magical thinking and fantasy?
So despair really is the absence of imagination. It's the absence of being able to even consider the possibility that things might be better or that the world might be better with you in it as opposed to without you in it. And um, boy, that is one of the tough challenges, Mark, is to invite in or reopen or rekindle one's imagination to a slightly better future. Now, Dan Tomasulo, who has written about hope from Columbia University, really talks about the power of micro positive actions. Like literally, can you brush your teeth today? You know, as a step back into life, can you take a shower once this week? You know, like, can we somehow motivate movement, positive action that we can witness and see where that takes us, you know, and that's tremendously powerful for lots of people. Um, the danger with imagination is if we encourage too much too early, it just feels false. It feels like false hope, false dreaming, fantasy, right? And so I find it much more effective to listen for evidence of it in what the client is offering me or how
Mm,
they're showing up.
mm,
You know,
mm,
um, I was remembering myself when I lost my brother. You know, I wasn't conscious of it, but I was wearing pretty much black and gray
mm, mm.
until one day someone said, you know, you do have some color in your wardrobe. And I was like, all right, there's a possibility there. Like I didn't even notice I was shrouding myself, but
Hmm.
I was. And then suddenly I look at my closet and well, I don't feel there's no way I'm wearing royal blue, but maybe I could wear a little olive green. I don't know. Let's see. So, so to and then to bring that to my therapist and say, my friend said this interesting thing about me wearing black and gray. And she said, yeah, well, where is that taking you? And why did you find yourself looking at your closet? Like,
Mm,
just like evidence, like little evidences of that possibility of seeing oneself a little differently.
right. I like what you said about imagination, about despair being the absence of imagination. So, what happens? The mind closes around pain, that we contract around pain, our sense of possibility narrows, and we need to do something to actively expand it, or we stay in that kind of a
Yeah,
narrow channel.
I think it's a concussion of things. And I want to acknowledge that for many of us, there are neurochemical realities that make moving out of depression or out of despair much harder. I mean, some of us literally have brain chemistries that are more oriented toward pessimism, fear, doubt, anxiety, and we have to work really hard to change the chemistry. Or to create a different chemical balance within the brain. And here's where medicine can be incredibly helpful. Um, and so it's really a combination of I use the word concussion because that's what it is like. It's like a shock to the system, such and we can't and too much has broken apart, right? I'm being flooded with negative thoughts. I have negative or difficult affect that doesn't seem to ease. For whatever reason, I may experience myself as being isolated or whatever the kind people who are reaching toward me, it doesn't have effect on me. My body feels like it has no energy or it has such energy that I cannot calm down. So it's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, it's relational. And when a number of these dimensions are affected in ways that actually contract our understanding of ourselves in the world, then it requires a tremendous amount of effort to begin to loosen the hold on that. And here's where spirit can and cannot be helpful, right? If I have a meaning making system that says that I ought to be punished for not being better in the way that may have protected my child, that could be torturous on a human being, you know? If I have a meaning making system that there is a divine presence that is generous and kind and benevolent and compassionate and forgiving, then I'll have a different experience perhaps of my where I can place my despair. Does that make sense?
Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you about the role of spirit and spirituality in resilience. Do you work with people in changing their meaning making systems when they're not working for them?
All the time. All the time. One of the most consistent pieces of research about faith systems, and here we're talking about religions and, traditional religions, spiritual practices, but also systems of faith, such as, faith in the goodness of nature or the benevolence of nature or so on, is that when we have a belief in something larger than ourselves that is a caring belief or a benevolent belief, this is Einstein's, is the universe benevolent or not, how do you see the universe kind of thing. um, then we navigate the ups and downs of life with greater agility. It doesn't mean they aren't excruciating, but resilience is more likely. But if we have a meaning making system or a belief system that somehow uh, centralizes us as the cause of harm, and that there's very little forgiveness in that meaning making system, that's very hard to overcome.
And do people resist changing their meaning making system
Sure.
even even when they desperately need to?
Yeah, those are the tricky moments when people choose to come to therapy or choose to do, consulting or choose to participate in transformation groups and then hold fast to what they knew was true. Change is not easy. It just isn't. And some people, I mean, you know this from your own work, some people have evidence of the destructive nature of life far more profoundly directly than others.
Hmm.
Right.
Right. Right.
So um, I like to um, live into the possibility that what we're looking for when we're shifting meaning making systems is just, can we move 3% more in the direction of softness or openness, 3% more in the direction of kindness or forgiveness? Just tiny steps, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why your work is so beautiful and effective and compassionate, is
Mm,
it's not heroic in
no.
that old kind of patriarchal way. I'd like to know what you think of the idea of embracing adversity. The Stoic idea of when we prepare ourselves for adversity, when we understand the condition that we're in, and we embrace adversity as something that's going to make us more human, that's going to actually deepen our experience, that's going to free us ultimately and give us courage. Does that resonate with you as a psychologist? Does that work with people?
It works with some people, and the people it often works with are the people who've already experienced growth after an horrific event. So imagine in my 20s, I lost both my parents and my sibling in a car accident, right? And I found a way to navigate back into life in such a way that in my 30s, I felt like I can grow, I can move forward, I can create a vocation that's meaningful to me, I can build relationships, I can open my heart again. That person is more likely to experience the next adversity as an opportunity for growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's often navigating that first terrible firestorm that it is often can be the trickiest for some
Mm-hmm.
people. Um, I'm very reticent to talk about let's embrace adversity when the person is in extreme pain, right? If they enter the room with that as a philosophy and then they say, okay, and so now the horrible things have happened, and um, I'm thinking of the families of hostages on both the Palestinian and Israeli or the Ukrainian side, how you can have a meaning making system that says adversity will help me grow. You can know that intellectually or believe that intellectually. But when you are in the fire
Mm-hmm.
and it is excruciating, that philosophy in and of itself probably isn't going to help you in the moment.
The reason I ask is that part of the suffering, it seems to me, that a lot of us go through in times of adversity is feeling that there's something wrong
Yeah,
happening. It's wrong. It shouldn't be. This isn't how a successful person lives. And so when we understand that and part, the paradoxical part, and the fact that this is absolutely part of our inheritance
yeah,
as human beings, I think it expands our ability to tolerate pain when it comes and avoid self-pity and the whole why me? Well, why not me?
exactly.
That's always been my
Yeah.
response. Why not me? What planet did I think I was living on?
Right. Why did I think I was special? Yeah. I remember I had a meal with a Tibetan monk. He was in our house. We were making dinner together, and I was crying because I knew that my marriage was falling apart, and somehow the domestic act of preparing this meal, it was starting to feel like a last meal kind of thing.
Mm,
And the monk came in, and I, was embarrassed that I was crying and tried to hide it. And he said, "What's wrong?" And I told him just a tiny bit. And he said, "Oh, this is good. This is very good." And I was like, "This is good." He said, "Yes, suffering brings us to a place of greater compassion. You'll have more compassion for others." I was like, "Oh, okay. All right."
Were you able to hear that, or were you resistant? Did you feel yourself resisting that?
Both, both it was elevating and it was burdensome, because I was still struggling with poor me, poor me, poor me. Oh, right. I could use my suffering on behalf of others. Like both,
Yeah,
most,
yeah.
but clearly I remember the moment. It has stayed with me for 12, 13 years. And um, I don't think we can live resiliently if we don't accept the reality of suffering, that it is present, it is indiscriminate. You used a beautiful word, it is part of our inheritance. talking about nature, you can't look at nature with any sort of consistency without recognizing the profound, constant, daily, organic suffering of the natural kingdom. And I'm not
Mm,
even talking about what we've done to the natural kingdoms. I mean, just the cycles of life,
mm,
death, predator, prey, etc. So if that is our biological inheritance, and for whatever reason, the inheritance of this life on Earth, then we must strengthen our own capacity to see it, accept it, and then stand in it in such a way that over time we can move forward.
mm,
I think one of the ways in which we often feel most wrong is we feel like we should be through this by now, or over this by now, or have integrated this somehow by now, or understand it by now.
right. And that brings me now to my next question, which is about patience. Patience is one of the great challenges in the healing process. So often we don't know things are changing,
Right.
and they may not be. So we're in this mysterious place where we have to trust.
Yeah.
So when we trust in that moment, Maria, what are we trusting?
I think that is the essential question. And I think there's a unique answer for everyone.
Mm,
Uh, some of us have trust that eventually things will change, right? The cycle of life will shift. Some of us have trust in something beyond ourselves, divinity, God. Some of us have trust in the love of our family. Some of us have trust that the world is speaking to us in synchronicity, metaphor. I mean, it's so unique to each person. Frederick Buechner wrote a powerful little essay on it, imagining the moment God is speaking to Noah, I need you to build me an ark.
mm,
There's going to be a
mm,
flood. I need you to build me an ark. That we can't look at his face because his face would be tortured in
mm,
horror and disbelief. We can't look at his stomach because his stomach would be just, ready to vomit and heave. Like,
mm,
what? I have to, what? I'm saving it. Like, what? We have to look at his feet. Like, where are his feet taking him? So some of us have trust just in that, in like,
mm,
where are we showing up every day? Where are our feet taking us? Are my hands still making meals for my family? Am I still crocheting little doggy outfits even as I cry? So there's
mm.
so much possibility for trust. I think we need to not no no healing happens if I try to overlay what I have trust in on you.
And that gets to false hope and false trust.
Yeah.
What is so destructive about false hope, false trust, false cheer? What does that do that interferes with resilience?
Yeah, I think when we experience false hope, or when we've put our trust in someone or something, even when we had a sneaking suspicion that wasn't going to last or sustain or be healthy, there's just too much dissonance between the real reality and our expected reality. There's too much of a gap, and it creates a cycle of disappointment, which only contributes to more disillusionment and darkness and despair. True hope, we call in my field, I call it grounded hope or grounded optimism, really rests in those small movements toward slightly better. Can I take a deeper breath today? Can I be a little more open to what I actually am feeling today? Can I be a little more honest with myself about how hard it is and how patient I need to be? Can I bring 3% more compassion? Uh,
Mhm. Does false, go ahead.
it's just, I also just want to acknowledge how important it is sometimes just to give ourselves a break and watch Game of Thrones start to finish. Like, to take a break from the intensity of it and allow ourselves, um, what is the term I'm looking for? Distraction, to allow ourselves some distraction as a kind of temporary recovery mechanism.
Mhm. Does false hope tip into fear? And hope and fear are can be closely aligned when hope is fixated on a particular outcome.
Yeah.
So how does false hope lead to anxiety?
Because false hope usually rests in a specific outcome. That's the mistake we make with hope, that it's attached to an outcome. You know, he really is going to love me after I do these 10 things, or life cannot be that bad again because
Mm,
I go to church, temple, mosque every day.
mm,
Or, that there's somehow some protective mechanism that will allow us to not suffer again or not suffer as deeply. Um, and when we get attached to an outcome, that's when things shatter, right? That's when the hope becomes an actual shattering experience as opposed to an integrating experience. And and we know unconsciously, I think we know that when we're so committed to one specific outcome, that's really rooted in anxiety. That's us trying to control the universe, which we don't have control over. So
right.
um, that's where the attention and the fear is.
So if we can't hope for anything in particular, what are we hoping for?
We're hoping for the term I use is, you know, something that is a little more life-giving. A
Mhm.
little more life-giving to you in the ways that it's meaningful to you. If someone said to me, you have to sit down and knit doggy coats, I'd be like, that's going to destroy me. That.
That's never going to happen.
Yeah. But, what is life-giving to me?
Mm,
What does a little bit more positive experience, positive motion, positive energy feel like and look like in me in this?
mm. So it's hoping for an inner experience, not some outer thing to happen to us. So we're
Yeah,
hoping for something that gives us more life. That's something that gives us a bit more
right,
vitality or
right. And
openness.
and I do think universally, one element of that which is life-giving is more connection, whether that's deeper connection to oneself, connection to others, or connection to something that's meaningful, larger than the self. That it is impossibly hard to navigate life when you feel isolated,
Mm,
alone, exiled, abandoned. So I do think one of the universal threads of slightly better that we're looking for is deeper connection.
beautiful. Just one last question. The difference between healing and curing, so many people think the healing and curing mean the same thing. Most of us who have been around for a while know that you can die fully healed.
Yeah.
Um, have you ever had an experience of seeing someone who was healed but not cured that you could share with us?
Sure. Sure. Um, I worked with yeah, a teenager who was dying of brain cancer, and there was no cure. Medicine had given her every opportunity, and even opportunities that seemed so far-fetched. They tried everything, and she was dying. We were sending her home with hospice support to die, and she was able to articulate in those last few weeks all of the wonders that she had experienced during her time as a patient at the hospital. And she'd been a patient there for years and years. And she was incredibly generous with her love and her sweetness and her hopes for other people. She spent her last days assigning who got what toys and what stuffed animals and giving them away.
Mm,
And she died in a state of peace.
mm, mm,
And that's remarkably healing. And because she was peaceful, it was much easier for a number of members of her family to experience her death with I call it a tint of peace,
mm,
in the middle of the excruciating pain. There was like just an edge of rose gold, if you will,
mm, mm.
in that experience for some of them, not for all of them, but for some of them.
Yeah. So what does that depend on? How did she come to that place where she was able to be so generous
Yeah.
and in a moment when she might have been, just feeling badly about herself?
it 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 and by the way, she and no one who is healing is in that state 24/7,
Of
right? There are
course.
moments where we are begging for a cure, um, or raging against the injustice of it all, or devastated by the effect this is going to have on our loved ones. Um, Ultimately, from a resilience point of view, what we are looking to experience over time. And by over time, I mean years, and I would suggest sometimes even lifetimes, that over time we become larger than the experience of the pain or the suffering. So in her case, larger than an identity as a cancer patient,
Mm,
or larger than a knowing that I've had failed marriages, right? We own it. It is us, and it is not all of who we are. Um, and that is the in addition to agility, in terms of resilience, it is that expansion of oneself around the PTSD, or around the abuse, or around the loss.
mm. So beautiful. Thank you very, very much for taking the time. More than anyone I know, I think you really have explored this stuff and are able to communicate it in such an eloquent way. And I know the community is going to benefit from this a lot. So, Maria, thank you.
Such a joy always. And thank you for your great work in the world, Mark. You are one of the people I look to remind myself that there is a way to move through life resiliently, with an intention of goodness and beneficence upon others.
Thank you, my dear. See you again soon.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.